September 1944, Eastern France. American forces had surrounded a German garrison dug into a fortress position. Stone walls, artillery, machine guns covering every approach. Inside, 1,500 German troops under the command of a major who'd sworn he'd never surrender to the Americans. Patton sent an officer under white flag with a simple message: surrender now. Avoid unnecessary bloodshed, and your men will be treated as prisoners of war under Geneva Convention rules. The German major's response was defiant, dramatic, and delivered with absolute conviction. Tell General Patton that if he wants this fortress, he'll have to kill me to get it. It was meant to sound heroic, unbreakable, the kind of statement that rallies troops and intimidates enemies. Patton's response was 4 words: "I can arrange that." What happened next wasn't a siege, it wasn't a prolonged battle, it was a systematic destruction that lasted less than 12 hours and proved that Patton took people at their word. If you want to see what happens when you dare Patton to do exactly what he was planning anyway, hit subscribe right now. The German position wasn't some makeshift defensive line, it was an actual fortress, one of dozens the French had built in previous centuries that dotted the countryside. Thick stone walls, natural defensive advantages on high ground, limited approaches that could be covered by interlocking fields of fire, underground chambers that could withstand artillery, a well that provided water. The major commanding the garrison had about 1,500 troops, a mix of Wehrmacht infantry, some artillery crews, and a handful of officers from various units that had retreated into the fortress as American forces advanced. On paper, the position was formidable. Taking it by frontal assault would be costly. A siege could last weeks. The smart play might be to bypass it entirely, leave a screening force, and continue the advance. But this fortress sat on a key road junction. Leaving it in German hands meant American supply convoys would have to take longer alternate routes. It was an obstacle that needed to be eliminated. Patton's preference was always the same: offer surrender first. Not out of mercy, though he wasn't unnecessarily cruel, but out of efficiency. A surrendered position costs no American casualties and takes no time. A fought-over position costs both. So he sent his ultimatum. Standard terms: surrender, be treated well, go to a POW camp, survive the war. Your alternative is a fight you cannot win that will cost lives on both sides. The German major refused, but his refusal was more than just no. He made it personal. He invoked honor, duty, and his oath to never surrender, and he challenged Patton directly: if you want this fortress, you'll have to kill me to get it. Other commanders might have seen this as an opening for negotiation, maybe offer better terms, maybe try to persuade the major that surrender wasn't dishonorable given the circumstances. Patton saw it differently. The major had stated his terms clearly. He wanted to die defending the fortress. Patton was simply going to grant his wish, efficiently and overwhelmingly. When the messenger returned with the major's defiant statement, Patton's staff expected frustration, maybe anger, perhaps orders to bypass the fortress and come back to it later. Instead, Patton was almost matter-of-fact. According to accounts from officers present, his response was chillingly pragmatic. The major says we have to kill him. Let's not disappoint him. Then he started issuing orders, precise, comprehensive, designed to accomplish exactly what the major had challenged him to do, but in the most efficient way possible. First, Patton ordered a complete encirclement, not just blocking the roads, a total seal, no one in or out. Cut the water supply if possible. The fortress was strong, but the Germans inside still needed supplies, water, and eventually reinforcements. They'd get none of those things. Second, he ordered every heavy artillery piece within range to register on the fortress. Not a random bombardment, precise targeting. Stone walls might stop small arms, but they wouldn't stop 155mm shells. Underground chambers might protect against shrapnel, but direct hits would collapse them. Third, he ordered air support. Not fighter bombers dropping area bombs, tank-busting aircraft with precision munitions targeting specific structures within the fortress complex, the major's command post, the artillery positions, the ammunition storage.
Finally, and this showed Patton's attention to psychological warfare, he ordered loudspeakers brought up. The Germans inside would be told exactly what was coming, not as a threat, as a schedule. At this hour, artillery bombardment. At this hour, airstrikes. At this hour, assault. Give them time to think. Give them time to realize their commander's heroic stance was going to get them all killed. Finally, Patton made it clear to his own commanders this wasn't going to be a careful, casualty-averse operation. The major wanted a fight. They'd give him one. But it would be so overwhelming, so intense, so precisely coordinated that it would be over quickly. Get it done in hours, not days. The message to his troops was equally clear. The Germans inside had been offered surrender. They refused. What happened next was their choice, not ours.
The assault began at dawn, not because dawn attacks are traditional, but because Patton wanted the Germans to spend the entire night knowing what was coming. The loudspeakers had broadcast the schedule. The Germans inside knew that at first light the artillery would open up. They had hours to think about it, hours for the less fanatical soldiers to question their major's decision, hours for doubt to spread. When the sun rose, the artillery commenced exactly on schedule, not random fire, coordinated barrages targeting specific sections of the fortress walls. The goal wasn't just to damage, it was to methodically dismantle the defensive positions. The fortress had stone walls several feet thick. They'd withstand a lot, but Patton had brought up heavy guns specifically to deal with fortifications. Shell after shell slammed into the same sections of wall, opening breaches, creating weak points, exposing the interior. German artillery tried to respond, but American counter-battery fire was immediate and precise. German guns would fire, and within minutes, American shells were landing on their positions. German crews quickly learned that shooting back meant death. After 2 hours of artillery, the airstrikes began. P-47 Thunderbolts carrying 500-pound bombs, not carpet bombing, precision strikes on identified targets. The major's command post took 3 direct hits. The ammunition storage was hit, causing secondary explosions that rocked the entire fortress. The main gate was blasted off its hinges. Through all of this, the loudspeakers continued broadcasting, describing what was happening, announcing what would come next, offering a final chance to surrender before the ground assault, making it clear that anyone who wanted to live could walk out with hands up and would be treated well. Some did. Small groups of German soldiers began surrendering, first a few, then dozens. They'd slip out of damaged sections of wall with hands up, walking toward American lines, choosing life over their major's oath. The major tried to maintain order. He had soldiers who tried to surrender shot as traitors, but this only accelerated the collapse of morale. Troops realized they were trapped between American firepower and their own fanatical commander. By mid-morning, the fortress was a wreck. Walls breached in multiple places, artillery positions destroyed, the command structure shattered by the precision strikes on the major's headquarters. And then American infantry attacked, not from one direction, from every breach in the walls simultaneously. Sherman tanks rolled up to point-blank range and fired directly into openings. Flamethrowers cleared bunkers. Engineers used explosives to collapse remaining strongpoints. But here's the remarkable thing. It wasn't the chaotic urban warfare that fortress assaults usually became. It was systematic, almost mechanical, because Patton's preparation had been so thorough that there wasn't much left to fight. German resistance was scattered and disorganized. Small groups fought briefly, then surrendered. The major's threats to shoot deserters had failed. There was no coherent command structure left to enforce them. American forces moved through the fortress section by section. Loudspeakers followed them, broadcasting surrender appeals in German, offering safety to anyone who laid down weapons, making it clear that continued resistance was suicide, not heroism. The major himself was found in what remained of his command bunker. He'd barricaded himself with a handful of loyal troops. When Americans breached the position, he reportedly aimed his pistol at them. An American sergeant shot him, not dramatically, not after a speech, just professionally ended the threat. The major had said Patton would have to kill him. That's exactly what happened. The handful of soldiers with the major immediately surrendered. They'd followed orders to the end, but once their commander was dead, they had no interest in dying too. The entire operation, from the start of the bombardment to the final German surrender, took less than 12 hours. American casualties were minimal. A few wounded from sporadic German fire, none killed. The systematic preparation and overwhelming firepower had made the actual fighting almost anticlimactic. German casualties were significant. The major was dead, as promised. About 200 other German soldiers were killed, mostly in the bombardment or during the final assault. Another 300 were wounded. The remaining 1,000 surrendered. When American intelligence officers examined the fortress after the battle, they found evidence of how close the major had come to losing control even before the assault. Notes from junior officers questioning the decision to fight, soldiers who'd been executed for attempting to surrender, signs that morale had collapsed days before the actual battle. The major believed his defiance would inspire his troops. Instead, it had trapped them in an indefensible position with a commander who'd rather see them die than surrender. Patton toured the fortress the next day. According to officers with him, he showed no satisfaction, no gloating. He was matter-of-fact. The major said we'd have to kill him. We did. That's what happens when you challenge people to do what they were planning to do anyway. But Patton also made a point during that tour. He visited wounded German prisoners and ensured they were receiving proper medical care. He had American medics treating German wounded side by side with American casualties. He wanted his own troops to see that once the fighting stopped, they treated prisoners humanely. This wasn't contradictory. It was Patton's philosophy. Be ruthless in combat, professional in victory. Destroy enemies who resist, treat enemies who surrender. Never blur the line between the two.
Word of what happened at the fortress spread quickly through both American and German forces. For American troops, it reinforced what they already knew about Patton. He would use overwhelming force when necessary, but he'd always try diplomacy first. The German major had been given multiple chances to surrender. His death was the result of his own choice, not American brutality. For German forces, the message was more complex and more chilling. The story wasn't just that the fortress fell. Fortresses fell all the time. It was how completely and systematically it fell. How Patton had taken the major's defiant challenge literally and methodically fulfilled it. How 12 hours of precise, coordinated firepower had reduced a strong position to rubble. German commanders started circulating the story as a warning. When American forces offered surrender, particularly if they were Third Army units, you took the offer seriously. Because refusing meant Patton would do exactly what he said he'd do, no more, no less, but with overwhelming efficiency. Some German officers later stated in interrogations that they surrendered to American forces specifically because they'd heard about the fortress. They'd learned that Patton's threats weren't negotiations, they were statements of fact. Challenge him, and he'd accept the challenge. Dare him to destroy you, and he would. This was psychological warfare at its most effective. Not propaganda, not exaggeration, just the truth. Patton meant what he said, every time. The fortress battle also reinforced something German intelligence had noted about American tactical doctrine under Patton. Americans would use maximum force when needed, but they'd also show restraint when possible. They weren't randomly brutal. They were predictably brutal only to enemies who chose to fight. This predictability was almost more terrifying than random violence. You knew exactly what would happen if you refused surrender. You knew exactly how Patton would respond to defiance. The choice was yours, and so were the consequences. Looking back at the fortress battle, it's worth considering what the German major's defiance actually accomplished. He'd wanted to defend German honor, to show that not all Wehrmacht officers would surrender meekly, to make the Americans pay a price for their advance. What he actually did was get 200 of his men killed, 300 wounded, and the remaining thousands sent to POW camps for a position that held for less than a day and delayed Patton's advance by maybe 12 hours. If he'd accepted the initial surrender offer, all 1,500 of his troops would have survived. They'd have spent the rest of the war in relatively safe POW camps. Many would have gone home to their families after the war ended. Instead, hundreds died or were maimed. And for what? The fortress fell anyway. The road junction was in American hands by nightfall. Patton's advance continued without meaningful delay. This is the brutal arithmetic of war that some idealistic commanders sometimes forget. Heroic last stands make good stories, but they don't change outcomes when you're facing overwhelming force. They just increase casualties. The major had thought his defiance would matter, that his willingness to die would inspire his troops and maybe make the Americans think twice. But Patton didn't think twice. He just applied more force. There's a leadership lesson here that applies beyond military contexts. When you make dramatic statements, "You'll have to kill me," "Over my dead body," "I'll never surrender," you'd better be prepared for your opponent to take you literally, because some people will. Patton was one of those people. He didn't interpret defiant challenges as opening negotiating positions. He interpreted them as statements of preference. You want to fight to the death? Okay, that can be arranged. The German major learned this lesson too late. His troops learned it at the cost of their lives or freedom. Other German commanders learned it and surrendered when offered terms. The fortress fell in September 1944. The German major died there, as he'd promised he would. His name isn't widely remembered. The exact location of the fortress is less important than what happened there. What matters is the lesson. With Patton, dramatic defiance didn't prolong anything. It just changed the intensity of what came next. Other commanders might have been insulted by "You'll have to kill me" and tried to prove they weren't monsters by offering better terms or conducting a careful, casualty-averse operation. Patton simply took it as a statement of preference and acted accordingly. There's something almost coldly logical about this. The major stated his terms. Only death would make him surrender. Patton provided those terms, efficiently and professionally. The major got exactly what he'd asked for. For modern viewers, this raises uncomfortable questions. Should Patton have tried harder to persuade the major? Should he have been more reluctant to kill someone who was essentially committing suicide by soldier? Or was Patton right to take people at their word and not waste time on those who'd made their choice? Is there something almost respectful about granting someone their stated wish, even when that wish is death? The answer probably depends on your view of leadership and responsibility. What's undeniable is the outcome. The major said, "You'll have to kill me." Patton did. And every other German commander who heard the story learned to be very careful about what they said to American negotiators. Because with Patton, challenges weren't deterrence, they were permission. Do you think Patton should have tried harder to avoid killing the major, or was the major's death his own responsibility? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories about leadership, responsibility, and the consequences of dramatic statements, subscribe now. See you next time.